Part 2 of our previewing fall camp series here on the Swarmcast for HawkeyeInsider.com 24/7 Sports. David Eickholt, Eliot, Clough, Sean Bock for 24/7 Sports. If you missed our previous podcast, we did about 50-minute breakdown of everything surrounding the Iowa offense going into fall camp. Fall camp is now underway, and we are going to get the chance to speak with a lot of the players, every assistant coach, Kirk Ferentz, and everybody else on Friday before we get the kids open practice on Saturday, and fans will be welcome back into Kinnick Stadium. But guys, we've gotten a lot of love on this last few podcasts, so I'm really excited to kind of continue the momentum we're on here. But this could be a busy week. I think now it finally feels like football is like I said after media days, I felt like that was kind of the first thing to really kind of reboot football season. But now that we're getting the chance to get some direct intel based on practices, there's actual storylines going into it. We can almost stop projecting. Projection season's almost over. But I'm excited for what's to come. I don't know about you guys.
We can stop talking about how Mark Gronowski is an awesome leader every 5 seconds, which we've all heard. But it is time to actually play some football. So right around the corner. I can't wait for Iowa football media days on Friday. Open Kids Day practice on Saturday. We get to, like I said, actually see some football, live reps by Mark Gronowski. Hopefully we get to see some Sam Phillips, like Xavier Wampa at free safety, a bunch of different things we didn't get to see in the spring with all those guys out. I think Cade Pieper was the only starter on the offensive line that was available in the spring too. So lots to see, lots to learn. I guess Trevor Lauk and Jack Doetzler were available, but guys that we fully expect to be starters. But anyway, lots to see, lots to learn this week. It's gonna be fun. I'm excited.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be good to get a taste of football season, and obviously we get a little teaser this week, and then there's 2 weekends where you go without it, and you're kind of the anticipation of it. So yeah, I'm interested to see how many guys, compared to the last couple of years, they hold out of the Kids Day scrimmage, because obviously there's always a ton. But the last 2 years and this year and last year, there seemed to be a lot of optimism on the health side compared to the last couple of years. So maybe we see less guys taken out, but it's kind of how this things goes. But yeah, I mean, with the transfers coming in, like there's a lot of intrigue there. Obviously, there was Cade McNamara last year, and him coming off his surgery and his recovery. But now you have guys like Gronowski, Hank Brown, Jeremy Hecklinski, Bryce George, Sam Phillips, the guys on the defensive side of the ball, even like Ty Hudkins, if he's able to go. So there's a lot of this is probably the most intriguing quarterback. Not just obviously we want to see Gronowski, but last year I feel like a lot of us were like, we don't really. I mean, obviously Brendan Sullivan was there last year, but this kind of feels like there's a bit more intrigue with guys as passers, because we saw a little bit of Hank Brown, but he didn't have the best scrimmage. But then Hecklinski too. Like obviously there's been a lot of excitement about him. So yeah, I'm pretty pumped too.
And Cade McNamara was awful last year. He was so bad.
Who was the last Iowa quarterback to have a great Kids Day? Didn't Spencer have one like that was like really good? Everyone's like, oh my gosh, the offense is ahead of the defense. Like, yeah.
Ironically enough, I think that was the year where they had like the worst passing season of all time. But I'll tell you, Kids Day is when they absolutely tore them up. And at that point, I sat back and I said, I will never overreact to one fall camp scrimmage or practice or tidbit ever again. That was a very humbling lesson.
When was it that Brian Allen had like a disgustingly good open practice?
Was it last year or the year before?
I think it was the year before, and then he ended up playing pretty well the following year. But yeah, like other than that, I mean, and we always get some weird obscure takeaway like nothing against Cale Kolarek, but he was awesome in the spring game. He's a walk-on safety. So and I mean, with the lack of depth at safety this year, maybe he's actually a part of that rotation. So
yeah. Carson Sherrar had one a couple years ago too. I think a lot of people are pretty excited about. And who else? There's always a defensive lineman that pops up too. Like that has a really nice practice. So
I think Chima was pretty good in the spring this year.
Yes, that's who exactly it was. Because Seth Wallace said afterwards, like, make sure you count that one. Because it would have been a sack. He had about 7, I think Seth said, just so it's kind of a funny on the side comment. Oh, you know what, Eliot? When it happened, it was we were walking onto the field, and you and I were talking, and Seth walked right by us and said, make sure you count that sack. So it wasn't like Seth was being interviewed. He's mentioned Ike to get some love for what he did. So, yeah. And he could be a rotational guy this year, too. I know they're really, really excited about that. So, speaking of defensive linemen, pro transition right here. Let's start the defensive line going to fall camp. The more I look at this, guys, the more excited I am about it. Like there's a ton of depth here. I think there's a lot of really good competition. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of attention paid to Jose Epinesa because last name, the 5-star, the All-American. But the other side of me also says they don't need him to be this big-time contributor in year 1. Now, if he ends up being that's great for Iowa. Really like Aaron Graves going into this next season. Max Llewellyn's my first breakout guy. Ethan Hurkett, I maybe we see him in the scrimmage because the other side of me thinks, okay, are they just going to hold out the 6th-year guys just to protect them? Like, are we going to see Logan Jones out there even, right? Jennings Dunker, I really hope they throw him out there just to continue to get some more live reps there. And offensive tackle. But for everyone else, I mean, Eliot, you wrote about this in your tidbits last week. I just kind of doubled down on it to an extent about 45 minutes ago. The more I hear about Bryce Hawthorne, the more intrigued I am about him. Like, that's a guy who I talked to some college scouts. I've talked to a lot of NFL people here over the last week. The college scouts said that he's a guy who probably should have gotten some more Power 4 offers because there were enough intangible tools there. But the same people also said that Hawthorne just maximized the opportunity that he had at South Dakota State. Really worked on his body, really worked on his, polishing up a lot of his footwork. And I continue to hear about his leverage. Like, he just understands how to break free and to clog lanes. So if he can break out in this fall camp, he's a guy who I think could contend for that starting spot. But I also think right now, the other defensive tackle transfer, Jonah Pace, he's a guy who's probably going to be a higher floor. I think at this point, I still think Hawthorne's adjusting to the level of competition that he has. But I think there's a lot of optimism surrounding this room. I think Kelvin Bell, Jay Neiman have done a really nice job of getting the right pieces via the portal. And I really look at Kelvin Bell's last recruiting class. Like, you throw in Joseph Anderson, like just the guys that they got, they attacked every single need across the line. And they got 4 different, they're all different prospects and they all fill different roles. So I'm intrigued about that. Can Jeremiah Pittman kind of break out as well? I'm interested to see that. But I think the defensive line room is in a very good place right now. But as we've kind of talked about throughout the offseason, the more I look at this Iowa defense, the less I feel like we know, really know about it, just because there have been a lot of names in the program, but haven't really had a lot of production. The defensive line has to be better than average. Like, it has to be better than good for this defense to really kind of live up to the own standard it's set. But again, long story short, I'm keeping a close eye on Max Llewellyn, Aaron Graves, and then Bryce Hawthorne's kind of my dark horse right now.
This group is probably the most the position group that I have the most confidence in on the defensive side of the ball, because you look at linebacker, bunch of new faces. You look at DB, and I'm really high on Xavier. I'm really high on Zach Lutmer, on Cohen Entringer, but cornerback's a question mark. Obviously, we're going to get more into all of that. But between Max Llewellyn, Ethan Hurkett, Aaron Graves all coming back. You mentioned Jonah Pace, Bryce Hawthorne. Brian Allen was just the physical tools and the explosion and the recklessness almost with which he plays. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's ferocity, tenacity, probably better words. Kenneth Merriweather, another guy that's got the physical tools to make things happen on the defensive end. And then you go past guys like Hawthorne, Pace, Pittman, and they've got walk-ons in Hubert and Gaffney that both have game experience. So there is some serious depth of experience, not just depth of, oh, these guys look talented. It's depth of, oh, they've played in football games. And then you talk about a guy like Jose Epinesa, who hasn't, but is a 5-star, has the legacy, has all these things attached to his name. Plus, he's got a little bit of that Brian Allen ferocity, tenacity, stuff like that I mentioned. This group is, I would probably say, I don't know if loaded's the right word, but like they've just got guys that you trust in each position group, and then they've got more guys behind that you trust in each of the spots on the defensive front. So, I don't know if there's going to be one guy that actually reaches double-digit sacks for the first time since AJ Epinesa. But if anything, I think the collective unit, it'll be similar. It has a chance to be similar to, I think it was Lucas Van Ness's last year when he had 6.5. Joe Evans had 6.5, and I think Deontay Craig had 6.5, and they had like 35 team sacks. So it's got a chance to be something like that, and they had a bunch of tackles for loss that season too.
Yeah, I'm excited about this room as well, and I think you look at this like up and down the defensive line. You think like, okay, there's like 6 or 7 guys that you feel really good about, but then at that defensive, like that 4th defensive tackle spot, you got Jeremiah Pittman, Luke Gaffney, Will Hubert, guys who, we've kind of been hearing about throughout the last couple of years. Pittman was into that role last year. But there are a number of other guys that, Gaffney and Hubert, that they feel like can potentially step up too. And, you said with Jose Epinesa, it's like, do you put him inside? Do you put him on the edge? I mean, Hawkeye Sports has him at 6'3", 260 right now. We had him at 6'4.5", 275, I think it was, at the Polynesian Bowl. So I don't know which one's good there, which one's not. But if he could add that extra 1.5 inches, like that would be ideal. I mean, it's not the end of the world, especially on the defensive line, but it's more so the weight factor. Like he plays lighter than he is, but he's still a load, like, in terms of like how he can pass rush and how he can, kind of bull rush too, and, get through the defensive line, but he's also really moves extremely well. And yeah, I mean, looking at some of these like preseason magazines and preseason, preview stuff, like I see this Iowa defensive line, and I go, okay, they're probably, right below that A tier, like that 1A tier in the Big Ten. Like, I don't think it's elite,
Yes.
but I think it's really good. I'm surprised, like, there's been numerous outlets that have them at number 1, and that's like above Oregon. I think Phil Steele is the one that really stood out to me. He has Iowa at number 1. Like Oregon, even with what they have coming back, they're like not number 1. Ohio State always has a pretty good defensive line. Penn State's got a couple of guys too. I know kind of the edges are a little bit of a concern for them. And, even like Michigan, but I mean, Iowa's up there at number 1. And, I look at that, I'm like, okay, like that makes sense. But then again, like to play devil's advocate a little bit, obviously Ethan Hurkett, very good. Max Wallen, can he do that in a expanded role? Aaron Graves, one of the best in the Big Ten on the interior. Then you have 2 guys transferring up that are projected to be your DT2 and DT3. DT3. That's like kind of that's a big step up to make and like be one of the best in the Big Ten. Like, obviously we've heard a lot about Bryce Hawthorne, and what he can bring to the table, but that's still like a pretty big step. Be as elite, I think, as some people are projecting to be. I mean, maybe they're going to be that good. Like they have more depth than they had the last couple of years, and I think like you said, it can kind of be more of a committee approach in terms of sacks because sacks don't tell all the stories. I think a lot of it too is just like pressures and can you get guys for tackles for a loss? Can you wreak havoc in that way? So that's gonna be really important. But yeah, it's gonna be fascinating to see how kind of this group. You have a lot of guys that you're kind of expecting a lot from. Can they meet those expectations? Like I know that sounds like a cliche thing to say, but I think it's really true with this group because can Max Wallen take the next step that we're expecting him to? One can say that Deontay Craig maybe wasn't as productive as people were saying he was going to be last year, and maybe didn't meet expectations or as good as he really was. Can Llewellyn exceed that? Brian Allen, we've talked so much about him over the last couple of years. Can he take on that third edge spot? And these other transfers too, like I mentioned, like there's there's a lot, to like about this room, on paper, but there's still, to me, like, there's a lot of guys that you have like going up. Like, there's not a ton of, Jonah Pace has experience in the MAC, and so does Bryce Hawthorne in the FCS, and the other guys. But you got to realize how many guys are going up, like in terms of like taking that next step, and that's one of my like cautious, like things to be cautious about with this group.
The other thing to remember too is we're throwing these expectations or projections on Brian Allen. He missed all of spring, missed part of summer, like with he had surgery, so he really hasn't had that sort of critical development time. So now you're putting a lot of pressure on him to develop a lot during fall camp. The other thing I think that's interesting about this group, and I think you phrased it well, Sean, I think they're just below the elite of the Big Ten. I think it's a very high floor defensive line. Like you have enough guys, you have enough production to where they're going to be good. Can they be elite? Do they have that one or two go-to guys that can go pin their ears back and go get a sack when you need to? Can they contain the edge frequently? I think they're among the highest floors in the Big Ten. I don't know about ceiling, but Iowa doesn't need the highest ceiling. They just need constant production from guys that can live up to the expectations and roles that they need to fill.
In terms of that highest ceiling, I think if not all of it, a large contingent of it is on Max Llewellyn, because he's the hype guy right now. And like we saw what he could be in flashes last year. That spin move, nasty. Again, physical tools, they're right there. A lot of it's on Brian Allen too. I mean, you mentioned he didn't just miss the spring, he missed bowl prep too.
Yep.
Both very critical. So I think a lot of it is on those guys. To a degree, I kind of think we know what Ethan Hurkett is. Like he's good, but I don't see him reaching that elite level like we mentioned. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's.
I think it's Joe Evans,
clicks,
and that's a very good. That's still a very good defensive lineman.
Yeah. He's still very good. So hear what I'm not saying, and that when I say that I think I know what he is. Aaron Graves too, like 3 sacks against Illinois State, and then 3 the rest of the season last year. But at the same time, like you mentioned, Sean, it's this defensive line philosophy isn't necessarily about racking up those numbers. Does that take them to that elite level? Maybe, but so much of this philosophy is disruption. Get the quarterback off his spot, make him throw interceptions, fumble the ball, stuff like that.
Does that change, though, when you don't have a lockdown proven CB1 and a secondary that probably has more question marks than we're used to seeing an Iowa defense have? Are they going to make that kind of adjustment or change that defensive line philosophy a little bit? I think they explore that idea, but they're going to remain true to what they are as well. So let's dive into linebackers. Eliot, I'll let you take the floor. I'll let you guys kind of rattle this off, and I'll chime in last. But probably the biggest question mark for me surrounding this defense, and I've been pretty much on the record saying that the last 4 or 5 months, but I'm intrigued about kind of what's to come.
There's a reason it's the number one question mark. It's because of how important it is and how good it's been, right? That Mike linebacker in that I just did an article on over-unders for it was part of the Hot Takes article. I think fullback U said Carson Shire was going to lead the Big Ten in tackles. Well, Carson Shire is going to play the will linebacker spot, and Iowa has only had one will linebacker lead them in tackles, and that was in 2020, and it was Nick Neiman. And the other non-Mike linebacker to lead Iowa in tackles in the last 10 years was Jake Gervais, who's a safety. So Mike is pretty important, to say the least. That's what this defense does is they funnel tackles to the Mike linebacker, right? And that's Jaden Harrell. And what we saw of Jaden Harrell last year on defense was not good against UCLA. Granted, the defense as a whole didn't play great in that game either, but Jaden was not particularly good in that game. I'll say that. So that's the tiny sample size we have of Jaden. And then you look at the recent history of linebacker, particularly Mike linebacker and Jack Campbell to Jay Higgins, right? That transition Jay Higgins played the Leo, so he had some consistent on-field defensive snaps. Jaden Harrell, not really. Playing a lot of special teams. And expecting, like, when I've said this before, particularly on our boards, people will clap back at me and say, well, Seth Wallace is the best linebacker coach in the country. Well, yeah, he's really good. He's really good. If he's not the best, he's top 3, top 5, right? And that doesn't necessarily translate to All-American linebacker every year. It's a ridiculous expectation.
The standard's insane.
Yes. Could Jaden Harrell be that? Maybe. I mean, I'm not gonna put money on that to be frank, but he could be good. Like, he could be good. It could also be linebacker by committee, which is something that I think all of us have heard. I've heard it from behind the scenes as a possibility with Jaden Montgomery, with Cam Buffington at Mike linebacker. Talk about Carson Shire. Then there's Landon Van Keekerix. Talk about Jackson Rexroth. Then there's Preston Reese. Then there's Derek Weiskopf. Like, there's a lot of possibilities with this group. And some of them not great, like relative to what the linebacker group has been. I really like Carson Shire. I know there's been buzz about him. He's just had a lot of trouble staying healthy. Jackson Rexroth makes me nervous after the bowl game. I think he getting like any Leo in a pass coverage situation is not going to be great relative to a cash back. But he struggled. I could have all this concern for almost no reason. Again, referring to Seth Wallace and what he's able to do. And I really like Carson Shire, but there are legitimate questions in all 3 linebacker spots.
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit on everything there. And I think one of the things that stood out to me this offseason is that Seth Wallace was the one, from what we've been told, Seth Wallace was the one that didn't want to get a linebacker in the portal. Like, I think it sounds like there were a couple other people inside the program that maybe were like, okay, maybe linebacker is the position that we want to explore a little bit because, we really don't have a lot of depth. We don't have a lot of depth. Wallace, was like, no, like we got our guys. Like, if a Nick Jackson type popped up, like that would have been perfect situation, but there weren't any that, they really felt the fit. And Seth Wallace was like, okay, like, I want to ride with our guys. Like, I feel like, we have the guys that, we feel like we can win with. Yes, it's going to take a little bit. It's not going to be, as easy because when was the last time really that there were this many question marks at the linebacker position going into a season for Iowa? Like, I mean, my history doesn't go back as far as your guys' does, since like mine was more like 2017 was kind of my first like glimpse of Iowa football.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there was stuff before. Like, you're on mute, Eliot.
Sorry, maybe that Jack Campbell to Jay Higgins transition, but
but like you said, Jay Higgins had
right.
I mean, he didn't play as many, and also that was the year they got Jackson, right?
Right.
So you had him coming in too.
Yeah. You don't. Yeah. I mean, I would put that as a question mark just because he hadn't played in the Big Ten, and I remember you guys thinking he could play the mic, and like it was just I would not put it on par with where it's at currently, but there were question marks. Yeah.
No, I mean, and there's a lot of talent too. Like, I think that was one thing that Seth Wallace kind of wanted to, set a precedent with. It's like, yes, we have question marks in this room. Like, yes, there's a lot of experience, but we have a lot of young talent coming up too. And I want these guys to, get that exposure early on so they can become like a Jack Campbell type or a Seth Benson type. And that's not saying like these guys that are, projected to start this year, but the Derek Weiskopf, Cam Buffington, Preston Reese, those guys. And, it's just like, oh, you don't have experience? Like, we're just going to go into the portal. Like, I don't think that's really a precedent maybe that he wanted to set. Maybe I'm kind of overthinking a little bit, but I think that was just kind of, an interesting thought in my head throughout the offseason is, Wallace really feels confident in the development of his guys and, how they can potentially, take that leap forward. And, they were kind of thrown into the fire at random points the last couple of years. Like, that wasn't planned with Jaden Harrell going in against UCLA at that point in the game. Like, that's kind of a tough spot to be played into. And really, like, no one thought much of Jay Higgins in that, his first season with Iowa. Like, there wasn't really anything that you go, oh, wow, like, this guy's going to be a stud. Like, obviously you've seen it in high school and, hear it from behind the scenes, but there were still, a lot of question marks with him and, how he could really perform in that expanded role. And, there's some similarities there with this group. Like, yeah, I don't think there's elite talent at the top or guys that, are going to be, draft picks next year. But, I think that depth perspective that they have this year is going to be really helpful. And, is that because, they feel like they have a lot of bodies that they can play with and put guys, in different spots, different situations and feel confident with it? Or is it because they don't fully feel comfortable with their main three guys? Like, that's really kind of the big thing for me right now.
Healthy competition breeds acceleration in terms of development. So I think it's a curse and a blessing that I feel like you don't have three like guaranteed permanent marker starters, because I do think there are guys waiting in the wings that if they really take fall camp seriously and the favorites, quote unquote, just don't develop as quickly as possible, we could see a replacement in the starting lineup within the first couple of weeks. I mean, let me think back to, I think it was my first or second year here, and his name is escaping me. Maybe one of you two can think about. He was Amani Jones. We heard so much about Amani Jones being that kind of Mike linebacker. He had, strength freak, crazy athletic, awesome teammate, great on special teams, right? Guys, he was benched at the end of the first half. We really didn't see him ever again. I don't think the players that are favorited right now are going to be to that level. But I'm not going to sit back and say, look, I think you roll with these guys. If they don't have the best start, you keep them out there. I think especially before you get into Iowa State, you want to have three guys that you feel really, really good about. The linebacker by committee might be fantastic against Albany. It might be fantastic against, UMass, because I think we've kind of written those as guarantee wins, barring some crazy upset. You're not going to get away with that against Iowa State. I know Iowa fans will not want to hear it, but Rocco Beck's one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. Iowa State's going to be a preseason ranked team. You're going to Ames. They're going to be a very good football team. I like Harrell. I think he approaches the game the right way. I think he's highly respected in the locker room. I think he can make things happen. But do you explore putting Zach Lutmer in that cash spot over Rex Roth? I mean, we could sit here and name 7 different guys, I think, that you'd feel okay, you can understand why they're playing. Because, again, we've heard Preston Reeves behind the scenes. That entire linebacker class that's all from the state of Iowa. I love Cam Buffington, Derek Weisskopf. Like, these are really good athletic kids. There's a lot of pressure on Carson Shire, a lot of pressure on Jane Harrell. They got to be the leaders of that room, and they got to be able to hold it down, because I do think that you're going to have guys behind them kind of nipping at their heels. So, again, they might be close right now, and I think if you're Seth Wallace and if you're Phil Parker and Kirk Ferentz, you're hoping that because they're that close, it's just going to accelerate the development of everybody involved. And then you kind of see who's built different from the standpoint of, okay, we can keep them out there consistently. We don't need to have it by committee. I think if you're running certain situational packages or sets, I think that's a good thing to have. But if you're rotating guys, like, this isn't like the offensive line, right? You want to feel good about keeping 3 solidified guys out there. So maybe I have a different thought process than you two, but I just think you want to be able to have it nailed down by at least the start of Big Ten play, but you want to feel good about the position group going into Iowa State.
Is that too much to ask after one game to feel good about the position group going into Iowa State?
Enough to where you feel like you have a top 3 that can compete against Iowa State. And if they don't live up to the opportunity, then you can go back to that week 1 approach in week 3. And then you have it set up by the time Big Ten play starts.
And how many do you factor into that rotation? Like, the only way I would personally probably see any of the three young guys being fixtures in that rotation of Will, Mike, and Leo
Yes.
would probably be Preston Reese.
I agree.
That I would say Jaden Montgomery and Landon Van Keekericks have a shot to overtake Harrell and Carter.
I was more so stating from the standpoint of there are guys that have a chance to dramatically increase their stock rather than they're going to get in there and start. But again, by increasing their stock, they're kind of nipping at the heels of the solidified quote unquote starters. Does that make a little bit more sense, Sean, or am I just chatting?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're gonna feel totally great about a unit. Or about this unit specific. I mean, who knows how they kind of feel internally, because obviously we're not inside their heads and we don't know, what they see right now. Like, we'll probably get a better feel for it this weekend and during media day. But based on game experience wise, I really don't think you're gonna find that until maybe Big Ten play. Like, I feel like it's gonna be one of those things against Iowa State where it's kind of just you got to put your guys out there and kind of see how they perform, because Iowa State's got a offense that they also have some question marks throughout. How are they going to replace receivers? They still have a pretty good tight end room. That's going to be one thing that is going to be fascinating. I mean, running back, that's a big question for them too. With Abu Sama, is he going to be that guy that takes on that that number one role? Can he be as efficient as he, or as dominant as he's been in other times? I mean, obviously last year it felt like he kind of took a step back in a way. So Iowa State has those question marks too on the offensive end. So I don't think you're really ever gonna get I don't think we're gonna fully see what this unit can be until obviously later in the year. But I think saying that you want to feel great, or you want to feel good about a certain group against Iowa State, I think that's kind of might be a stretch right now.
It could be. And the last thing to kind of wrap up the linebacker portion is this. The reason why I would have those expectations is because how many snaps, again, I get game reps and behind the scenes reps are two totally different things. You try to simulate game speed and contact, but let's face it, guys, you can't do it, right? Jane Harrell, Rex Roth, Shire, these are guys who have been in the system for this long. They should, if they're going to hold down the spot, they have to find a way to establish themselves as the top three going into Iowa State. That's kind of more so what I mean by that. So that's why I think there's pressure on them, because it's not like they're freshmen and sophomores going in there. The freshmen and sophomores that Iowa has, I feel like it could be pretty darn good. But if you have guys that have taken the majority of spring ball reps, including the past couple of years, because remember, they rested Jay Higgins a lot. They rested Nick Jackson because he's as old as, Eliot and you at this point. He's a guy who played a lot of football. So that's kind of where my mindset is about that. And I'll be really interested to see what kind of happens this weekend. But flipping over to the secondary, I think TJ Hall is cornerback one at this point. I think it's been pretty unanimous across the board based on my sources and what people have said on the record. I love Xavier Wampa playing at free, but again, it's such an interesting thing because I do feel like there are some legitimate question marks right now about the secondary, but I'm not exactly going to go on the record and say they're not going to be good, because I'm not going to do that to Phil Parker. And Phil Parker, time and time again, has proven that, Iowa is DBU as far as Big Ten play goes, and they always have a guy who ends up stepping up to the plate. So I'm curious what you guys' breakdown is, and I do think that battle for a cornerback 2 to 4, it's going to be interesting, So Eliot, I'll let you take off.
When I was at the other place, we had similar conversations about Phil Parker and the defensive backs. And then the DBs got carved up against Mizzou. Right? And it's similar to that linebacker conversation. They weren't first, second year guys. They were third, fourth year guys at that point in time. Now, if TJ Hall has really taken that leap forward from just a guy to dude in this offseason, maybe we're having a different conversation. I'm still not, I don't know that Deshaun Lee has elevated his game since he first became a starter. if you know what I mean. Like, I don't know that he's reached another echelon. With Shaheed Barrows, that's a question mark. We got some hype from behind the scenes about him, of course. And then Jalen Watson and Rashad Godfrey entering year 2. Neither of them enrolled early. So this is a group that is unproven. And in the time that they've been on the field, they've been decent in TJ Hall and Deshaun Lee. So if all of the hype about TJ Hall is true, that makes you feel significantly better, because Iowa is just better when they have a dude, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But you need a second corner to play at the same time. What is Deshaun Lee? What is Shaheed Barrows? What is Jalen Watson? Does Jalen Watson become a starter? Is Shaheed Barrows, this end all be all fixes the situation? I doubt it, because you can have all the great FCS reps in the world against good competition. Like, if there's a guy that's going to slander the FCS, it's not me, right? But does he take that FCS, that MBFC experience, and become the bona fide starter opposite of TJ Hall? I'm not sure right now. They really wanted that kid from Miami of Ohio out of the portal, and he ended up at Auburn. Like, I would feel a lot better if they had him right now,
Yeah, and I think too, you mentioned the Missouri game last year, the Music City Bowl. Like, there was so much dysfunction in that secondary, I think, like throughout the year. Like, you have 6, like, I know kind of the big theory throughout Iowa football and kind of just the fan base and, people behind the scenes, like last year with the secondary, like there was just kind of some issues, like in terms of, losing that Iowa State game. And you're kind of like, well, like the season's kind of done right now. Like, obviously we've heard that behind the scenes. We've heard that talk, how much of that was in the secondary? Like, you have guys that, competed their butts off, like Quinn Schulte, Jermari Harris, those Sebastian Castro, those guys, like, but it just felt like there was some sort of disconnect with this group and like communication wise, like from the older guys and the younger guys. Maybe I was misreading it. Maybe I'm looking into it too much, but it just kind of felt like there was something like that, especially, you have guys that, you're playing in the Music City Bowl. Like, Jermari Harris wasn't playing. He was kind of your number one guy. Yes, there were games where he was in there where they got kind of carved up a bit. But, Michigan State didn't have Sebastian. In other games too. Like, it's a very tough, like, I kind of throw that year out the window a little bit in terms of, okay, yes, it was a down year in terms of the secondary. If it's 1 year, like, okay, like, fine, whatever, throw it out. If it's 2 years, then it's a little bit more of a concerning trend. And I think with this unit, like, it feels like there's a little more cohesion. I mean, we would not have expected that last year to happen going into the year. Like, we kind of thought that, this is the number one unit on the defense, or like, at least that's what, maybe behind linebackers. But, what did Phil Parker say at the Big Ten tailgate show before the season? He goes, my number one concern right now is the secondary.
Yeah. We kind of scoffed that too.
I think everyone was kind of like, holy crap, like there's no way. Like, Phil is just doing that to motivate the guys, like whatever. And I mean, injuries happen throughout the year. Guys really couldn't find any consistency. Like, Sebastian Castro kind of took a step back, and it's kind of like, whoa, like we really miss Cooper DeJean and, how much he really, did for this defense. And this year, I don't really think there's a guy that you look at the secondary, like, yes, they'll miss Jermari Harris. Castro did some good things, but he didn't have the year that a lot of people anticipated. I don't think there's as big of a jump this year as there was last year going into, the year. And I think that's going to really kind of set, things well for the secondary, at least put them in a better place. And I think moving Xavier to that strong safety spot too is really helpful too, because that's kind of the spot he played in high school, and they kind of let him roam. But I think it's going to be better for him. Then Cohen having that extra year, he needs to stay healthy. He's probably the most, in my mind, he's probably the most important player on defense for Iowa this year, for him to stay healthy. Yes, you could have Zach Lutmer at that cash spot, but I think Cohen, like, he's the difference maker in the secondary, because that's kind of what Iowa's defense has been the last couple of years. Yes, he had Cooper DeJean, but I think that cash spot is so integral to, playing a good Iowa defense and how you want to play as a unit. So he needs to stay healthy. If he doesn't stay healthy, then that's when maybe you get a little bit concerned. But I think this unit, like I said before, that point I made where I don't think the jump is as big, compared from going from 2023 to 2024. And I think that's gonna be really helpful. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned it too with that cornerback 2 spot, Eliot. Like, that's a really interesting position battle for me, because what you got from Deshaun Lee last year, but he had some good moments. But is he I think Shaheed Barrios could be that number 2 guy, but also Jalen Watson too. Like, he's a really fascinating project there. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason to be a little cautious with this secondary going into this year compared to like what they did last year, and the expectations for them going into last year. So it's okay to be a little cautious, but I don't think that jump is going to be as significant as it was last year.
It's an interesting way to think about it, because I don't think I've thought about it that way too. Because the more I do think about the secondary, I mean, like you said, Jermari's a nice player, but all those guys are replaceable, right? I think the only guy that we kind of realize that, as far as the secondary goes, like obviously Iowa would take Jay Higgins back in 0.2 seconds, right? Nick Jackson, even though it would be his 7th year of eligibility, you would take him back in 2 seconds. I think as far as the replaceability goes, like everybody knew Iowa was not going to be able to replace Cooper DeJean. We thought, because despite Cooper leaving and all those guys coming back, everybody else is going to step up, and there was enough of a baseline of a defense that like they still would have had a really good. And honestly, if you look at statistically, like they were still a pretty decent defense, guys, but we've become accustomed to seeing an Iowa defense be top 5, top 10 at worst every single year. The secondary is going to be interesting. I do think TJ Hall, Deshaun Lee, and all those guys, I think they hear the noise. And you guys have talked to them. I mean, getting to know them, I mean, I think that's something that's really going to put a chip on their shoulder. And I think that could also really help accelerate. And quite frankly, what's going to help them get even better is if Iowa's wide receivers get better. And they have those intense practices in fall camp, and they go back and forth about it. Because in retrospect, it is kind of amazing how great Iowa defensive backs have been, because who have they had to go up against on the offense as far as wide receivers go? Compared to like the other lockdown guys, they would have to go lock down against any other team. Like, with all due respect, they weren't all conference caliber players. They probably weren't even 4th or 5th team, or 6th team wide receivers, right? So you get this additional wide receiver depth. I think that could really also help them push up. And you guys are right to bring up Jalen Watson. He's been a guy who's been repeatedly brought up. I mean, Eliot and I kind of looked at each other when he got brought up at Big Ten Media Days, when we said, okay, so this is not BS hype, or we're not being fed BS by our sources, because Kirk is very meticulous about who he name drops and when. So the fact that Watson got name dropped, I think it's interesting. So you're right. I don't think the jump's going to be as crazy from last year to this year versus the 2 years prior and this past year. But the level of intrigue for me is just really, really high right now.
Yeah, it's going to be, and they're going to be tested too, because you look at the schedule. We've talked a lot about the schedule. For not getting Ohio State, like they probably got, a pretty deep group of, teams that you could play with pretty good passing offenses. Yes, Iowa State loses those 2 guys at wide receiver, but I still think with Rocco back there, they're going to be dangerous. Rutgers really upped their wide receiver corp this year. Obviously, you have Oregon, without Evan Stewart, that's not going to be, as good, but they're still going to be pretty good. Penn State transferred, brought in a bunch of transfers. Nebraska's up their wide receiver corp. We saw what Michigan State did last year to Iowa's defense. There's a chance for Wisconsin to be better. We'll see there. Who else might
Iowa gives Wisconsin at such a good time, because Wisconsin goes through that brutal month where it's probably the hardest Big Ten schedule I've ever seen.
Yeah. And then who else am I missing in terms of teams they play that could have pretty good receivers?
You got Penn State, you got Indiana.
Yeah, Indiana, it brings back Surratt, and obviously they have Mendoza too. Yeah, you get the idea. Like it's a very good. They have a pretty dangerous schedule in terms of passing offenses, or at least potential for pretty good passing offenses. So they're going to be tested for sure. We're going to get a good glimpse at what they can kind of do this year, and how the secondary can kind of be a classic Iowa secondary.
I did not talk about the three guys. I talked specifically about corner, and that was it. So I wanted to interject on Wampa, Lutmer, and Entringer. I agree with Sean on Entringer probably being the most important player on this defense in terms of his health. If not him, probably Lutmer, honestly, because of that positional versatility. You cover two positions with those guys.
And the lack of depth at safety.
And lack of depth at safety. They could probably play free. Both of those guys could probably play free too. And lack of depth at safety. You got Cale Kalarick, who was good in the spring, but after that, like Ty Hudkins, if he's healthy, coming off some I think it was a hamstring, is what I've heard. But and then Alante Dean, like, what are you moving? Jalen Watson? Are you moving Rashad? Like, what are you doing back there?
Yeah,
it's a really good thing they got Ty Hudkins this offseason, because other than that, they'd be in trouble. So that group needs to stay healthy. I'm super high on all three of them. I love moving Wampa over to free. I love having Lutmer and Entringer, either one at strong or cash. Been told it's probably going to mix up between both of those positions depending on matchups and who they're playing against and all that. But I really like both of them. And I think so much of that defense is the defensive secondary. So much of their success is contingent on their health and how well Wampa does in transitioning to a more natural fit position for him.
And we'll be able to dive more into this kind of stuff too ahead of Media Day on Friday. We're going to have another podcast this week, and we'll preview the open practice as well. But I do want to just kind of end this podcast, guys. Special teams. I mean, this is going to be a top 5 special teams in college football. I think that's a pretty safe bet. I mean, you bring back Caden Wheatgen, who is among the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous returner in college football. Maybe not the most dangerous, I'll say this, the most consistent. Like, he's going to get you positive plays. Yes, he's capable of housing it back. And I'm interested to see what his roles could be on the offense. Reese Dakin, I've heard, taken massive strides this offseason. He's continued upon strength. He has a lot more understanding of the college game now. They're not really going to continue to install a bunch of different kinds of punts yet. I think they might during the season if there's a matchup or something they can exploit, but they're solely just working on him, being more consistent, because we saw the flashes last year. When he was great, he was great. Drew Stevens, I think he's really matured, and Kirk, LeVar, and everybody's talked about that's been the big thing for him. He's very mature. He's very meticulous in his routine now. He stays locked in. He doesn't listen to the outside noise, which I think is a big deal to him. And we've heard Keith Duncan, we've heard countless other Iowa kickers say, once you get in your routine, especially as a specialist, you're going to start understanding what it means to be consistent. So he understands his routine. He has all the confidence in the world in himself. And I have heard guys from at least one person, given the right circumstance, they are more than willing to let Drew Stevens kick from 60. Like, he has the leg strength to hit 60-yarders at a regularly routine basis. But again, you got to think strategy in game. Like, sometimes Kirk's could be like, well, we'd rather pin him inside the 10-yard line than attempt a 60-yard kick, right? But Drew Stevens has the leg to be able to do that. And if he can stay locked in as I've heard he is, and I think him hitting that kick against Nebraska really solidified his understanding of what it means to be consistent, what it means to be locked in. And quite frankly, it was a redemption story for him. Remember, the year prior, he got benched. So I know LeVar Woods is excited about the group. I know they're still looking for a couple different gunners, especially in punt coverage. You trust LeVar Woods. They're going to be dangerous.
In terms of the gunners, you've got Lutmer, you've got Entringer, you've got Jalen Watson, you've got, potentially Rashad Godfrey. That's not something I'm personally concerned about. Maybe Brevin Dahl. Like, that's a guy we heard about on special teams during bowl prep last year. But I would say there are a couple things that I want to address here. When we're talking about punter and Reese, he averaged 44.1 yards per punt last year, long of 61. You know who had the exact same stats as a freshman when we punted at Iowa? Torrey Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a bad start. A freshman All-American coming back. I think he's in a place to really take his punt, like the technician side of punting, to the next level and be more consistent instead of having those shanks off his foot. So I echo everything you just said on Drew Stevens. They got to give him a chance at like a 55 or a 60 plus, right? Like we keep hearing about it. Give him a shot. Like if it's 4th and 5 and you know you're not going to convert or you're not going to put the offense out there, screw like and talk about a kick that'll add to Drew Stevens, like his viability for the NFL. You hit a 60 plus yard field goal in college. You're going to start like scouts are going to start knowing your name if they don't already, because you can tell like even, and it's a very different situation, but like in the spring game, the way the ball comes off his foot as opposed to a guy like Caden Burr, who's their walk-on right now that's behind him from Bettendorf, who made more field goals than Drew, but like it's different. Like the way the ball pops off his foot, it's different.
It's the sound, dude. You can hear it.
You're right. In terms of the return game, I think the question is who's returning kicks next to Caden Weegan. My pick is TJ Washington. They like to put a running back there. And then long snapper. Is it Speltz? Is it Worrell? My money would be on Worrell right now just because of the bevy of experience he has at the college level. But Ike Speltz did get a ton of snaps during the spring because he was the only long snapper on campus. So, not a ton of questions just because you're so confident in Stevens and Dakin, but there are some things that we have yet to see with how special teams is fully made up this fall.
Yeah, with special teams for me, obviously, it's going to be really fascinating to see how that connection is without Luke Elkin, because he was probably the MVP of Iowa's. Considering it's pretty crazy, like considering all like the really talented specialists that they had, returners. Luke Elkin was probably the MVP, like because you just never heard about him because he didn't really make mistakes. And he made plays in punt coverage too. And, we talk about Gunner. I thought that was, maybe there was some lack of chemistry with, not having Torrey Taylor there last year. But I thought Gunner was maybe one of the, kind of things that maybe held the Iowa punt. Coverage was not as good as it's been in the past. But I thought Gunner was probably one of the issues on punting that really, that was a little concerning to me last year. Like, it just didn't feel like they downed, or, maybe it had to do with Dakin, but it didn't feel like they pinned guys as much as they, usually would when they had Taylor.
You didn't have Cooper DeJean either.
I think they had John Nestor back there, and then maybe TJ Hall. I can't remember who the other one is, but I remember seeing John Nestor there.
Lutmer was in there a little bit. I
think they threw about 4 or 5 different guys in there at different points.
Yeah. So that's going to be interesting to see how they kind of go about there, because those are really the only 2 big questions for me on special teams this year. Is how good is the long snapper without Luke Elkin? Who is it going to be? Probably Worrell. And then who's kind of that gunner? How is punt coverage this year? Because that was one last year that I thought really wasn't up to stuff. And obviously, like we said, it's an elite, expectation that's, with that punt coverage and how they kind of do things. But, who can they kind of get back to that level again?
It'll be interesting. So again, we're going to be locked in all week. There's a lot to talk about. Obviously, we're going to have a ton from Media Day. We're going to have a ton from the kids kids practice. They call it a scrimmage. It's not a scrimmage, guy. Like it's a practice. But we're gonna have a ton of stuff from that. So again, stay locked into HawkeyeInsider.com. 50% off an annual subscription now, and we will be back in a couple days to preview the weekend. Again, a ton to talk about. Football season is right around the corner, and it feels weird that we're playing football this month since it's still August, but I'm good with it. Give me more football. Let's do it. I think week 0 starts the 23rd.
Yep. Iowa State and Kansas State and
Ireland, Dublin. Yeah. The crazy part is too, when you look at the Big 12, like the race for that kind of number 2 spot, assuming Arizona State's going to win, like this could be the matchup that decides the Big 12 for the title game between K-State and Iowa State. So there's already a lot in the line in week 0. So again, stay locked into HawkeyeInsider.com for the best Hawkeye coverage out there.